Good morning, and thanks for joining us here on Condo Solutions on this Veterans Day. We appreciate you joining us, and we want to first of all have a shout out to all of our veterans who have made it possible for us to be able to do what we do. So we want to thank everybody. Remind everybody there is a parade today in Stewart about 10 o'clock and some dedications and things like that are going to be taking place. So those of you that have time and want to get out, be a nice way to show our veterans that you care and that you appreciate their service. This is Condo Solutions. Every Monday morning, we talk about things that affect you in your condo and your homeowners association. So we're here to answer any questions you may have. My name is Mark Breckbill. I'm a local CPA and a licensed community association manager, along with Peter Mullengarden. Peter's our attorney, and he's been doing this work for a long, long time and has an expertise in this field for years now, and can help you with some of the legal issues you've got. So we're here to help you. So you call in. It is a call-in show. 220-9788. 220-WSTU is the number in the studio. You can write that down for future shows too, so that in case you don't have anything this time, if you've got something coming up, you can write it down and give us a call. When you call in, we'll do the best we can to provide you with an answer. But as we always remind our listeners, we don't have your documents, and that can completely change the answer. So we'll give you the best answer we can based on your understanding of the documents and also based on our understanding of law and how it might apply in your case. So that's the only ground rules. We don't need your association name, but we do need a name, and we have a name this morning. So we will start out with that. John, go ahead.
Hey, good morning, guys.
Good morning.
Morning, John. This week, and when I went to go check my mail later on that day, I got a notice from my association. We were talking about pool reserves last year, and of course, notice came in the mail that said that they did want to have a special meeting of the membership. It doesn't mention who called for it. I'm not sure if that needs to be stated in it, but it does say that there's a special meeting on such and such date at such and such time. And then they also mention that there's going to be a special meeting of the board of directors at 7 o'clock. Our meeting will be at 6 o'clock. Now, my question is, on the proxy, they have the proxy attached to the vote. And in between, they have down here in bold letters on the proxy, it says something that conflicts, that's not factually correct with the special meeting. So they reversed the meetings on the proxy. Is that enough to void the proxy?
Not sure. Well, not looking at it. My first assumption is going to be probably not. I'm assuming that the owners' meeting is to vote on whether to pool the reserves,
whether to transfer them to a pool.
The existing reserves from line items into pool, right?
Yes.
Okay.
And there's also an amendment on there to change from 2/3 to 50+1 as far as the amendment.
Okay.
Process.
So the meeting times are set up that the membership meeting is at 6 o'clock and the board meeting is at 7 o'clock.
Yeah, and I understand that's the way it's got to be done to do this. You have to have two separate meetings.
Yeah, you got two separate meetings, although, if they did the board meeting first, in other words, to approve pool, it would be contingent on the owner meeting. And so, on the proxy itself, what the proxy should have on it in bold, capital letters in the largest font is the disclosure that voting to use reserves for other purposes or may lead to special assessment. I would have that disclosure on there. I'm not sure if that's on there or not.
No, it doesn't get that specific. It just says appoint either the secretary, A, or you can write in B, whoever you want to appoint as your proxy. And like I said, the 6 o'clock meeting is the members, 7 o'clock is the owners, and it says you can appoint blank as my proxy holder to attend the special meeting of the members at blank, blank, blank on blank date at immediately following the special meeting of the board of directors to be held at 6 p.m. So the notice, it makes, the proxy makes it sound like the board of directors meeting is at 6 p.m., where it's actually the special meeting of the membership.
Well, the proxy, the proxy has to have the date, time, and place of the membership meeting. Okay, so it needs to say at this time, at this place.
Everything's fine until they get to this time.
Okay. Now, I don't know if that's enough to overrule it or not, but what I was trying to get at is whenever the membership is voting either to waive reserves or to partially fund reserves or to use reserves for another purpose, there's this special disclosure language by the statute that must be on the proxy in bold and capital letters. I know it's not the issue that you were talking about, but it's still probably
yeah, they do have it between. It goes on after that. What I just read you, it goes on to say limited powers, meaning that even if you don't check off B and you go with the secretary to be your proxy, it does say limited powers. The vote's only for these purposes. And then it does say what you're referring to is waiving of reserves in whole or in part, or
okay, so that's on there.
Okay, yeah, that's on there.
Okay. I don't know if it's going to be enough to, quite frankly, overturn it.
Okay.
It's
just misleading, and I always thought it had to be factually correct. The proxy was more important actually than the actual notice, is my understanding.
Well, the proxy is important, but the proxy by statute, the only thing that has to be on there is date, time, and place. That disclosure language that you just read, okay,
yeah.
And the issue has to be written so it's clear that people know what they're voting on.
Mm-hmm.
Whether or not this inadvertent, I'm going to say it's inadvertent mix-up of indicating that the board meeting follows. The board meeting is before the special meeting. I don't know if that's enough.
Okay.
Quite frankly,
that's fair enough. Sure. Now the second thing is with this, they put the proxy on top. Do they have to state that the top half is a general proxy and the bottom half is limited, or can it just all be a limited proxy for voting purposes for people that are not attending the meeting?
Well, the proxy has to be limited, okay, because you can't vote by general on this issue.
Yeah,
so
we're used to the election in March where we have a general proxy to determine a quorum, and then we have the ballot. And in this case, it's a little different because we're actually voting on changing our docs. It's not a ballot to elect members. So we're kind of used to, in March, we're always used to seeing two different things. We're always used to seeing a general proxy to determine a quorum, and for people that can't attend, hopefully they send in enough proxies to get the quorum with the people that are there also. But we're used to just a separate envelope that has the office address on there. Also says you have to sign the envelope and put your unit number on there.
Well, that's correct.
Yeah, so who voted, so you can identify the vote.
Yeah, but that's because for an election the statute is very specific. That's the only vote, quite frankly, where you mail out a ballot that you have the envelope that's signed on the outside.
Yeah.
Because the election is a secret ballot that's every other vote, actually there should not be a ballot sent to the owners. For example, when you're voting on amendments, when you're voting on the reserve issue, when you're voting on anything else other than an election, the association should not send a ballot. The only thing they should send is the notice with a limited proxy, because they should not be sending out ballots for that. And the limited proxy is kind of like the first cousin to an absentee ballot, because you actually indicate your vote on the proxy. There is no general proxy voting.
Now, the only problem, the way they constructed this was because they had three questions. Two questions are on the front page, and they have another page that is a third question is on the second page where you actually sign your name. So my second question to you is, if I attend in person, what, I'm not going to fill out the top. I'm in person. I don't want to get counted as twice. You don't fill out the proxy if you're going to be there on top as far as, secretary or appointing someone. But I do want to vote below that, where it does say the legal language. So how do I vote? Are they supposed to supply ballots Or
what they should, again, I'm not running the meeting, but what they should have ballots at the meeting for people who are voting in person. Okay. So now they might make you fill out a proxy. I guess that's not wrong. But generally what I tell the clients is, they mail out a proxy, a limited proxy that, people can use. And then, generally speaking, those proxies that they receive, they should probably, make sure that obviously that someone who comes into the meeting in person hasn't also, sent in a proxy, because then they'll vote twice. So they do have to be careful that they do have to register all the proxies first before they start handing out ballots to those who are attending in person. But generally speaking, if you show up in person and you haven't sent in a proxy, they should have you vote by ballot.
Yeah, we had that
they
at our election last March.
They should have a ballot that looks like the proxy, but it's not a proxy. It's it's a ballot.
We had it at our election last year where people were actually because we had the same thing. We had not only election, but we had questions on whether to change the docs during the election meeting, the annual meeting, and we had people turning in the proxy who were sitting in the audience. They were actually physically there, so they got kind of twice.
Well, that's okay. I mean, you can vote you can sit there and turn in a proxy.
They were counting the proxy and the person twice.
Well, that's wrong, obviously. But I mean, they can't. Well, again, you can turn in a proxy even if you're there in person. You just got to make sure that you don't turn in a proxy and a ballot, because you can't vote twice, and you only get counted once, obviously, for the quorum.
Yeah.
So you just have to kind of have your check-in procedures. Have some kind of fail-safe. That's why I always suggest is, all the proxies get checked in first and indicates that, Peter Mullengarden is there by proxy and Joe Smith is voting for him. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if I'm also there in person, then, I can't, obviously then get a ballot as well, unless I revoke the proxy. In other words, I can rescind the proxy at that moment, take it back, tear it up, and then give me a ballot. Are there mistakes made? Yeah, sometimes. But again, I think it's best to check the proxies in first before you start handing out ballots. Just to make sure that there isn't any double voting.
And one more thing on this packet that they sent out a separate bright little 1-inch, 2-inch strip of paper that said in bright yellow, and some people got bright pink. These fluorescent sheets. It is very important, and very important in capital letters, that you check off yes, because it's a yes or a no whether to change, the docs to a full reserve. So it says it is very important that you check off yes on item numbers 1 and 2 if you want to pool the reserves. Now, just the way they've worded this, and the capital letter is very important. A lot of people here have construed that to mean an endorsement. Would you consider that an endorsement if they wrote it that way in capital letters?
Yeah, it's an endorsement, but that's not illegal. I mean, the
board can't. Okay.
Yeah, the only time the board can't do any endorsement is with respect to an election. For an election, they cannot endorse any candidate or say anything negative about any candidate or indicate who's an incumbent. So in the second notice package, it has to be completely neutral with respect to the election. No endorsements, no disparaging words, no anything. But on other issues, on non-election issues, there's nothing in the law that prevents the board from encouraging people to vote a certain way.
Okay, so they can endorse an amendment change if they want to.
An amendment change, the reserve issue. They can take a position on that.
Okay, yeah. We just haven't had a special meeting of the members in 20 years. I mean, we've never had a special meeting of the members in the 25 years I've lived there. We've only had one quorum during our annual meeting, and that was 20 years ago when we had enough people at the annual meeting, which is the election meeting, to actually have a meeting. But we're kind of in the dark here as far as, for instance, we're told that if we do have a quorum, then you have to elect or nominate who would be the chairman of the special meeting of the members. And of course, if no one gets nominated or no one volunteers or whatever, then the president of the association should then stand in. Is that protocol, is your understanding?
Well, that depends. Interesting question. Typically, the bylaws will address that. I mean, again, in your situation,
ours don't, unfortunately.
Usually it's there somewhere where it'll say either under the officer duties and functions, like for example, under the officer duty and function, sometimes they'll say that the president shall chair all meetings, and in the actual meeting section, frequently, and they'll have a order of business. Sometimes the order of business will indicate, first order, call to order, election of chairman, something like that. So, usually it is in there somewhere. If it's not, if it's completely silent as to who chairs a membership meeting, then typically, the owners do elect, or the owners there will designate who is going to be the chair of the meeting. And I don't really have a problem with that if it's if it's completely silent. In other words, if the bylaws say nothing, the owners for whatever reason don't elect the chairman, and the president chairs, I'm okay with that, because at the end of the day, since all this voting is done by limited proxy, so the owners have voted in essence how they're going to vote. Even if it's a technical error with who's the chairperson, that shouldn't have a substantive effect on what the vote is. Because the vote's the vote. So I don't think that vote would be, even if there was a technical error with who chaired the meeting, that's not going to be enough to overturn whatever substance was done, or it shouldn't be.
And can these packets, do they have to be mailed, or can they be hand delivered?
They can be
the notice,
mailed, hand delivered, or electronically transmitted to those owners who have agreed to receive it by electronic transmission, if they do electronic transmission for your association.
And when I say hand delivered, we have door knockers, and sometimes they put notices, not important notices in the door knocker. They roll it up and put it in there. Would that be considered hand delivered if they did it that way, or do they actually have to knock on the door and hand it to the person?
No, I think that would most likely be considered hand delivered.
That would say
your bylaws may say special meetings, must be sent by mail.
Yeah.
So if they say that, then I would mail them. Okay.
Yeah.
Because the bylaws are very restrictive. So if the bylaws conservatively, if they say must be mailed, then I would mail it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Because just like you said, it probably is in there as far. Buried somewhere in there who conducts these meetings. I looked as hard as I could. I didn't see it, but you're probably right.
The section usually to look at is look at the officer section, because usually in the powers and the duties of the president, oftentimes it's there. And then the actual meeting section, frequently it's there in terms of the order of business, where
officer and meetings is what you're saying. I'll look at that.
Yeah, look at those two sections.
Okay. Are you flying on today? Is your partner there today?
I'm here.
Silent Mark? Yeah, there he is.
I didn't have anything to chip in.
I guess I'm asking a lot of legal questions. I just wasn't sure. Because it's Veterans Day. I didn't know if you guys were going to have a show today.
No, we're good. I just, I figured Peter he's better on these. These are all legal
No,
stuff.
I know.
Let him handle those. But,
thank you. Thank you again. I do appreciate your help. I didn't mean to call 2 weeks in a row.
No, it's all right.
No, that's fine. We appreciate it.
I just didn't know if this was this technicality, because some say yes, it's got to be verbatim, factually correct, because it's misleading. If people don't, mostly they're going to look at the proxy more than they would look at the notice, because the proxy has the votes on there. And if they think that the meeting is going to be at 7 o'clock after the board meeting, then they might show up late. Then we don't have a quorum. We might miss a quorum from the people that are there. So
I'm not saying that it might not have. Look, it may have.
I understand.
It may have an adverse impact. Just hard to predict whether it will be enough to blow out the meeting. Okay.
Yeah. Who am I going to run to though? The Florida Business of Professional Regulation, Condo Department Compliance. I mean, those people are so underfunded over the years. They've really taken the teeth out of that department. They don't tackle anything unless it's something really major. and they don't even, the people there are very inexperienced. I try to always ask for someone who's, do you have someone who's been there 20 years? And that's always hard to find too. So it's not like you can go somewhere and get an arbitrator to come in and say, look, you didn't properly notice your meeting. The only other way to go is get a lawyer, and who wants to spend a lot of money on a lawyer over something, not as serious as you would want to hire a lawyer for.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm not sure this one, because that is, lawyer fee worthy, I guess.
Definitely not.
To use a phrase. Because at the end of the day, I think they would err. I mean, if there was a challenge, they'd err on the side of, okay, was this error enough to, impact the vote in a sense of, where people didn't have, the ability, again, to cast their vote. And as long as the proxy has date, time, and place, I'm not sure that that switch of the two meetings inadvertent. I don't know. I don't think it's enough.
No, I know. It could be argued both ways. I understand. That's the way it's done in America today.
Yeah, I think though that that is an issue, because if somebody was going to show up and potentially take back their proxy, and then they miss the meeting because they show up at the wrong time. If it was the association, we all get into the formality of all of this, and it is important. But I mean, I would definitely send out some sort of notice, whether it's putting in the door knockers like you talked about, or whatever.
Yeah, something clarifying.
Just clarifying that was a typo, and that the meeting is board meeting will follow the owner's meeting, and the owner's meeting is at.
Yeah, because Mark's right. The strongest argument that this is a real problem is if X amount of people didn't vote and would have otherwise voted.
Right.
And now they've been disenfranchised, and that would have affected the outcome.
Right.
So if it would affect the outcome because X amount of people did not vote because they came too late or they came to the wrong meeting, then that is a problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think if I don't know that my personal opinion is that if, let's say, you mailed out, or you have to mail out your notices, I don't know that you need to go through all of the cost of mailing out the correction necessarily. If you have an alternative means, for example, you've got that notification, you've got a board probably someplace that you can post, and I think if the association has made a reasonable effort to make that known in a manner that should convey it to everyone, similar to the notice requirement, I think then at that point somebody would be hard pressed to argue that they didn't know that the meeting had changed, and then you could argue it was just a Scrivener's error, and it was obvious from the other collateral material and the other material that was there as to when the meetings were actually taking place. But
well, in 718, does it address specifically factual errors and proxies and how to remedy them, or do you know that?
No, I mean, again, it just says what is a valid
time,
proxy,
date, and so on.
Yep,
it doesn't say that if it's factually incorrect, how to remedy it.
No.
Okay.
But and along those lines, John, the state does. These are the kind of issues where there's a vote, especially things that affect a person's financial interest, like reserves, things like that. They would take an interest in that if they thought that something was done incorrectly on purpose, and that it wasn't. It's one thing if you are sending out a notice and setting people up, telling them the wrong time, the wrong place, or whatever. But from time to time, there's errors made. I don't know that you have to go through the whole process of renoticing if if you just are correcting a Scrivener's error. So anyway,
I'm just amazed because we run it by the lawyer. I'm sure the lawyer or attorney for our association ran. It must have been proofread by more than one person. I would hopefully think that, but to have it in the section that is all in bold letters and to screw up that part of it, it just amazes me because it's not like a a little clause, where it's unimportant. You have to state the time and the date correctly. And for them to miss this and then send it out, it just kind of, it doesn't make you too comfortable, especially when these issues are concerning money and you have an association that can't. I expect this on the internet when I go online and I read the news, and these young reporters don't know how to put a sentence together, or they have a typo. I expect it there, but I don't expect it on a proxy in bold letters for it to be completely factually incorrect.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean. And that is, and it's an issue, and unfortunately, that's it could cause a problem. But you'd hope that people go through all of this stuff, but problem is some of these things, it just most of the time it's being done by people at a last minute trying to get a notice out within a required period of time, and unfortunately that doesn't always go through all the checks. It should, but it doesn't. So that's
because I had asked Peter earlier about when the people that do attend the meeting go to vote. My assumption would be what Peter said is they should be handing out a completely new ballot. But they say sign the ballot, your vote to amend whatever you're amending in your docs. Now, shouldn't that also say after the signature your unit number and building number?
If you're signing it, yeah.
Yes. You got to identify the vote, and there's no secret ballot there if you're amending the docs. You have to be able to identify who voted.
There could be. The only vote that you really have to keep a record of who voted what is when you're amending your declaration of condominium regarding leasing, with respect to changing the frequency or the term of a lease or the duration of a lease, or even prohibiting leasing altogether. Because for leasing amendments, there's a grandfathering provision in the statute that if you vote against it or don't vote, you're grandfathered under the old language and not subject to the new amended language until the unit is conveyed. So then you have to keep track of who voted for what to see who's grandfathered. It's the only section of the statute where there's this grandfathering provision, and you have to know how the members voted. Otherwise, typically there isn't any requirement that a ballot cast at a meeting be signed. But I do create ballots with signatures because some people, they object to the fact that I don't want to. On a proxy, you have to sign and date it. Otherwise, it's not a valid proxy. Okay. A ballot at a meeting.
Not only that, but on top of the proxy, it does have the unit number and the building number too on the very top.
Well, you have to have you have to have the unit number.
Yeah.
You have to know who cast it and it's dated and signed. So a proxy is a specific legal document that has to be done correctly. A ballot at a meeting is outside the statute. There isn't any statutory guidance on other than a election ballot, but that's different. But a non-election ballot, by the way, the election ballot never has a signature line on it. It's illegal. You can't have a signature line on it. But on a non-election ballot, voting on amendments or something like that, I've seen them with signature lines and I've seen them without signature lines. In both ways are typically okay, but when it comes to the leasing amendments, they need a signature line and a unit number and or building number if you need that for your community to know how the person voted. So
now, what's the fail-safe just for the people that are in attendance? As far as, let's say the yes people win, the no people object, and there's no way to know whose signature is whose. How do you determine if that signature is valid and attached to a unit owner if it doesn't have the unit number and building number on the ballot?
You mean a ballot that's cast at the meeting?
Yeah, cast at the meeting.
Well, there's a sign-in sheet, presumably, for people who show up in person that they sign in.
So you would match. Okay. So you would match the signature and the sign-in sheet.
But really, again, there's no requirement for a ballot cast in a meeting to be signed.
Yeah.
Sometimes
I'm just talking about unscrupulous people. Let's just say, for arguments, because I get a lot of older women in the community and say, "Well, they're gonna, you know what? They're gonna get us, and they're gonna get their way because the board wants their way and the manager wants."
Well, they're gonna rig the election. They're gonna rig the election. I shouldn't use.
Yeah, so I try to tell them that there's certain procedures, and they say, well, what procedures are there? And I say, well, I got to look it up. So then I call you guys.
Well, honestly, at a meeting with people voting in person, it's difficult, to be honest, to have any kind of perfection.
Control.
What you should
Yeah,
do.
I mean, you do try to have people sign in, okay, as they come in, and you hand them a ballot, right? And you try to make sure you don't have more ballots or proxies than there are people.
Yep,
hopefully.
That's a good control.
But normally those ballots, again, they don't have to be signed. They end up being secret. So it's typically, if they're not signed, then it's impossible. You don't know whose ballot belongs to who. And as long as you don't have more ballots than there are people voting, then it really doesn't make a difference.
I tell you, from a practical standpoint, John, what they should do is, first of all, you've got to have a procedure for making sure that someone who's now coming in person didn't submit a proxy, right?
Right.
So
right.
you're going to check all the proxy people, all the proxies in versus, and then check to make sure that that person also isn't in attendance. When they sign in, and if they've either taken back their proxy and are going to rip it up, or have never given you a proxy, they're going to sign in. You're going to give them a ballot. What you should do is those ballots should just be pre-numbered, so that you make sure that that you're handing out one ballot to one person, and that person's ballot has a number on it. Doesn't identify them. You're not recording what ballot number you gave them. That's not a issue. You're just keeping control of the ballots. And so if you've handed out 23 ballots,
people, and you would label it 1 through 50, and you'd hand it out that way. Okay.
Right. And then what happens is you won't get 50 back necessarily. Some people will take ballots and decide not to vote. But what you want to do is make sure
more than one.
As long as you don't have more than 1, 2. If somebody's handed in 2
because you can't overvote. Yeah.
Right. So that protects it. So now somebody could take somebody else's ballot that's not voting and vote their ballot. That's their problem. That's the person's responsibility to control their ballot. And and if they don't do that, they're subject to whatever somebody does with that. But
sure.
But that's how I would do it. Just pre-number the
So what they did was they did put an envelope in, but it's not like where it's an election. They just put the address of the office. You don't sign. You don't put your unit number on the outside. So when these ballots, when these envelopes get mailed back in with the proxy, and the proxy is attached to the vote sheet because it is a limited proxy, it goes to the office, and they can't open it until the special meeting time of 6 p.m. Is that correct?
No, they can. No, proxies you can. No, proxies you can open in advance.
Right.
Okay. And also, I'm not a big fan of
those ladies who don't like the management because they're thinking, okay, well, how do we know they just didn't make up a bunch of proxies in advance?
Well, you know what? Look, you can always
I got to listen to it, so I got to argue for them.
I know. Well, also, I'm not a big fan of when you said attached to. To me, it's much better if the proxy, if the proxy, there isn't a separate ballot that you attach to it or staple to it or something like that. Mm-hmm. It should just be one document, quite frankly. Okay.
Well, it's one document.
You sign it at the bottom. Okay. When you said attached, I thought maybe there's a separate ballot you attach to it or something.
No.
But at the end of the day, is there any perfection here to make sure there's no shenanigans? No. Okay. If someone wants to cheat, literally, and create their own, sign fraudulent proxies, and I guess theoretically they could. But everything is open for inspection after the meeting. All right. In other words, all the proxies and everything, all the voting materials. If someone wants to go through it, they can. And if they think certain proxies look fishy, they can contact those owners and say, "Hey, did you submit this proxy and vote this way?" And they say, "No, I didn't do that." And then, then they can, basically challenge that whole vote if it looks like there is some sort of shenanigans going on where proxies were forged or whatever word you want to use, fraudulent, and they can challenge it. Now, what I've seen just as a practical matter is under these challenges, if it turns out that the fraudulent votes or whatever votes would not have changed the outcome, generally the state will uphold it. Okay, they'll say, okay, there were some irregularities here, but the outcome wasn't affected, so the vote's good. I've seen that,
and that makes sense.
If it's a landslide, vote, and the thing won by 50 votes and 4 votes looked like they were fishy or whatever.
Yeah.
But I mean, I understand where the people want to have protocols in place, where there's armed guards by the ballot box, and and you have people giving blood tests before they open the box and stuff. There just isn't a lot in the statute, particularly for non-elections. Okay, that have elections have more protocols because the statute's pretty fairly specific. For the non-election votes, there isn't a lot there really. So the best safeguard, unfortunately, is after the fact. If half the proxies, the signatures look the same. In other words, geez, who wrote this? It's the same handwriting for 15 of these, names.
Mm-hmm.
That looks weird. And then you can contact these people and say, look, there's a proxy here with your name on it. Did you submit it? No. Well, that's a pretty good evidence that someone probably forged it.
Mm-hmm.
So
anyway, are they supposed to keep it for 1 year, like election material, or 1 year?
Yeah, all the voting materials.
Yeah. Okay. Well, at least I can go back and tell them that shenanigans will be taken if available.
Yeah. Well,
thank you for your time again, guys. You guys are great, and I always appreciate your program.
No problem. Thanks for calling, John. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. So it's interesting, Peter, that on something like that, it really is kind of hard to control some of those. The elections, of course, are really so important that you really do have to have a very specific procedure.
I mean, just look at our local and even national voting. We're still trying to implement safeguards, right? After 250 years as being a country, okay? We're still trying to, make sure there's no shenanigans in votes. And I'm not saying there are shenanigans in these votes, please. I'm not saying that, but there's, even in these elections, there's people making accusations of, fraudulent voting and this, that, and the other thing, and trying to implement safeguards. So,
it's funny.
Unfortunately, it is an imperfect system. We don't have, the proxies under armed guard or necessarily even under lock and key. There's no requirement that they be under lock and key. They're sent into the association, and they can be opened beforehand, and then they're counted and registered at the meeting. Can there be, like I said, shenanigans going on? Yeah, it's possible.
It's funny. They even on the national elections, we had a few years back here in Martin County, we had electronic voting machines, and they're really pretty nice. They, you went in and you basically touched a dot and voted. It told you, it gave you a message if you missed your votes and all of this kind of stuff. So they were really kind of nice machines. We used them for like one election, and then people complained that there was no way to recount, right? So people are saying, how do I know my vote is counted? There's no way to recount. I'm just subjected to this electronic.
Yeah, there was no paper.
Right. There's no paper ballot, no
paper record or paper history.
Right. So now we have this method, but even now you don't know if your vote counted, and that's the interesting thing, because what happens is you put your ballot into a slot, right? It reads it, and then it falls down below. All right.
Right.
But there's nothing that ties your particular ballot to the vote. There's nothing.
But to keep it secret, right?
Right. Yeah. So if, for example, it turned out that at the end of the day, one of the votes was off, or some vote was off, or one of those ballots didn't get counted, you don't know if it was your vote that didn't get counted. It was just a vote that didn't get counted.
That's right.
So, and they balance them out at the end of the day. There's a control procedure to take the total number of people who have logged in, and compare it against the total ballots that you've got, right? And then
Mhm.
at least the total is right, but you still don't know if your vote got counted. I mean,
Well,
and
look,
so
there's a reason why these stupid old jokes are around, like,
right,
vote early, vote often.
right,
Okay, in Chicago, they used to claim that half the cemetery voted.
and
Okay,
I think that still
in
happens.
in every election. I'm not picking on Chicago here, but there's always been those jokes. So, look, I'm not saying that the systems are broken and corrupt, and I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying the systems are not perfect. I don't know if ever they'll be perfect in the sense of free from potential cheating or whatever. But I think the systems for the most part work, and I think the claims of rampant rigging and corruption are I don't know, I think they're overblown. But I'm talking about HOAs now, condos.
Yeah.
I'm not talking about national politics.
No, I know, and but I would say, and this is just something for people to help with this process. If you have a method of logging people in, and so how many people are there, and you have a method of controlling, having a count on your ballots, so how many ballots you've given out, and as long as the number of ballots coming back aren't greater than the number of people that you gave ballots to, then you probably got some control to make sure that the election is valid. Do you know if somebody's neighbor grabbed a ballot and filled it out for them because they left it behind or whatever? No, you don't. There's no way to control that because it's just not designed to do that. That's not what the purpose of the vote is, And so from that standpoint, that's the kind of thing that we're talking about. But so it's in the long run, that's we use in the accounting world, we use a lot of control numbers for things, for counts and other things. We don't necessarily we're not always looking at the dollars. Sometimes we're just looking at the numbers. We may pull a sample and look at the invoice numbers, and tally up the invoice numbers, things like that, to make sure that we've got all the invoices. So that's the kind of thing that here too with the ballot. If you just log in and have a control of some kind, you're not tying it to any person. They have the right to vote without even though it's not a secret ballot, so to speak, but they have a right to not have to put their name on it. But at the same time, you at least have controlled the total number of ballots that are outstanding. So it's one way to do that. So that's kind of an interesting thing. And then I noticed one of the things that John says too is there was a procedure on there, or there was a vote on there to reduce the required vote to change an amendment. That's kind of interesting that we have that. I guess that's
that's excuse me. That's a pretty common vote because some documents require a very high supermajority for amendments, like 75% or 2/3 of the entire membership or all the owners, which makes it difficult to pass amendments. Now, some people think that's a good thing, right? Some people think that it should be very difficult to amend your declaration. Others think, well, maybe if it's too difficult, then there's no flexibility, and that's just two philosophies. Neither one is right or wrong. But rather than drafting a whole bunch of amendments that you may not ever be able to pass because you have a certain percentage of your owners who are just apathetic or whatever, just don't vote, so they never get that 75% vote. You try to like crazy, to get people out there to vote to at least try to lower that from 75% to a more manageable number percentage. And that is kind of a chicken egg thing or a catch-22. You got to get to 75% to lower to 75%, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah, that's right.
But you try to focus on that and try like crazy to get that passed, and then if it does, then you'll go for the other amendments because now they have a realistic chance of being adopted.
So. Yeah, and and that's the easiest way to to do that, and it is important to kind of get that done and to get that that to a more reasonable number, I think, because it does kind of it does kind of tie your hands if you're in a situation where you can't you require some kind of super majority. It is very hard, and there are things that do come up all the time that require a change or a some kind of an adjustment. So it's not it's good that you got a little have a little bit of more flexibility there. But like you said, Peter, sometimes there are things where there are specific things where a majority, a super majority does make some sense, particularly if it's having a major impact on your financial situation. If you're going to change or reallocate certain types of things, there should be a higher vote for that.
Again, some people think, like for example, we can't amend the U.S. Constitution, easily, right? You can, but it's very difficult. So I'm not saying it's a perfect analogy, but some people think that the Declaration, being like the Constitution of the community, should also not be susceptible to easy amendment. That's just a philosophy. I'm not saying necessarily I agree with it or disagree with it, but to me, your document needs to be flexible enough to meet the needs of the community, but not such that 5 people can amend it. So there's always a balance there.
Yeah, absolutely. So so that's a good thing. And then other than that, I think it's pretty much I know a lot of the other things that are coming up this time of the year. We this was really a reserve issue too. Going to the pooled reserves and how that's affected, and we talked a little bit about that last week. I was looking at some material that I'm getting ready to do for a presentation down at the SEER conference coming up, and I know one of the things that I was looking at again, and it really hasn't changed, is that if you're at pooled reserves, and you have pooled your painting reserves or general maintenance reserves or something like that, that's more of a services reserve or a maintenance reserve, there's no way you can file an 1120 at that point, tax return, which right now people aren't concerned about that. A lot of people are still, they're filing the 1120H because either they don't have any tax or most of them, they don't have any tax, and it's not a big deal. But I'm telling you that pretty soon here, you're going to have more and more situations where people either have taxable income, and the rate's 21% if you can file an 1120. It's 30% if you're filing 1120H, and that 9% can make a difference. Now, with 1120, you're also subject to state taxes, and that can be 5.5%. So, the difference in total might not be that big if your income was large enough, but most people don't owe state tax because there's a $5,000, exemption. So anyway, it's kind of an interesting thing because I think that there's going to be a situation coming up in the future where pooled reserves, if not done correctly, which nobody does, are going to cost people a lot of tax dollars, and they're going to be ticked off about it because they didn't realize, what it meant. But because people in condo and homeowners associations aren't used to stroking checks for $7,000 or $8,000 for taxes, that they think they're exempt and they're not supposed to be paying. But anyway, so I was looking at this. That's going to still be a problem. And I think, we're looking at some things there coming up. Other than that, I know, the other things that we're looking at right now, I think it is time to get some of these numbers in line for your budget and see where everybody's at. I think everybody's a little bit kind of trying to figure out what they're going to do. We're in this stage, it seems like, where people are starting to feel a little better about their communities, and now we're starting to want to fix things and catch up on some of the things that they didn't do before. But there's still a number of homes out there in the communities that are still struggling, with the existing assessments, let alone any kind of increase. So it'll be interesting to see what comes up in this next season. I think we're going to have more and more conflict between those that kind of want to do some things and spend some money and those that don't. So we'll see what happens coming up here in this next season. Other than that, anything, Peter, that you had wanted to make a final word on here in the last 60 seconds?
No, other than just to emphasize, for these meetings, mail out limited proxies. Don't mail out the ballots, except for election ballots. Don't mail out ballots.
Yes.
Typically, unless your documents have some specific provision about absentee balloting.
Okay. All right. Well, that's good to know. And I thank John for calling in. The rest of you out there, if you have something you want to ask about, feel free to call us. We're here every Monday, 9 to 10 o'clock, talking about these issues. So write down the number, 220-9788, 220-WSTU, and join us every Monday morning from 9 to 10 o'clock right here on WSTU Digital 1450, Martin County's Heritage Station.